Hey, thanks for tuning into my podcast. This is Big Head on the Block, hosted by me, Tim Henderson, aka Big Head. Hey, welcome back to Big Head on the Block. Today we're going to talk to a recent Baton Rouge City Police retiree, Bubba Knight. Welcome, Bubba.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get started, I know your real name is Robert, so there's a backstory behind the nickname Bubba. So please tell us what happened to earn you that title.
It happened, I was 22 years old. I had been transferred to narcotics at the sheriff's office and went in to talk to the captain, that at the time was Bud Connor, and sat down at his desk and we talked, and he told me I was coming into the division, but I was going to be working undercover for a period of time, and I could not use my real name because I had grown up in Baton Rouge and played football and other sports, and I was too well known. That name was too well known. And I said, well, I don't have a nickname. And he gave me that nickname. He said, you look like a Bubba, so you will be Bubba Knight.
I agree with Bud Connors. You do look like a Bubba.
Well, when I walk through places and people call out Bubba, I know they're police friends. And if they call out Robert, they're probably friends that knew me before that.
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes it same because I got the nickname in the police world, Big Head. So typically either cops call me Big Head or people from the street. So if people call me Tim, it's kind of similar. I kind of know that I knew them either previously because there's nobody that I ever dealt with on the street that called me Tim. They all call me Big Head. So one more intriguing story about you is you signed or walked on at LSU playing football. You were a fullback when you first signed with LSU?
Right. I was a fullback / linebacker out of Catholic High in 1984. And when I arrived at LSU, I was on a full scholarship. I chose LSU over Ole Miss in Arkansas.
Good choice.
And my father had played there. And so there was considerable pressure to go to LSU, which I didn't mind. When I arrived, I signed my letter of intent, and immediately I was brought in the back to the coach's office and explained that the fullback position was being eliminated and that LSU was going to a single back offense, which what they called it a running back. And I was given the option of moving to inside linebacker or staying at running back, which I stayed at running back for a year. And I played basically behind Dalton Hilliard and Gary James, which meant I didn't play much at all.
Well, I tell you what, the Dalton and James gang, that was a crew. Dalton with his shiftiness and Gary with the unexpected burst of speed. And they both, Dalton obviously went on to have a brilliant career with the Saints. I don't know what happened to Gary James, but Sammy Martin was also in that backfield. I remember him. He was a pretty good runner too. So yeah, the cards were stacked against you. You're a pretty big guy. I know you was a fullback, so your speed probably limited you a little bit, huh?
Yeah, I was a 4.7, 4.8 guy, and Dalton and Gary were considerably faster than that. I had to, in the off season, we would go over to Bernie Moore and run, and I would try to keep. Well, initially I tried to keep up with them, and it was a huge mistake. They would run quarter miles in 55 seconds, roughly, and we would run a bunch of them. And then we would run 220s and we would run 110s. And after the first couple of quarters, I couldn't keep up with them anymore. I would try. Well, and, we were doing, even back then, they were doing plyometrics and stuff. And I remember I was so tired one time, I made it back to the tiger cage and laid on the bench for about an hour. And I think Gary and Dalton came out and got me after about an hour of laying there.
Yeah, I bet. That's some steep, serious competition, man. It was a pleasure.
They were professional athletes. They were in college. They were awesome.
Dalton left a legacy. Gary James had that one play where he reversed the field and he took the ball 60, 70 yards and out sprinted everybody. That's one thing that was memorable. I remember Sammy Martin was a pretty good back, shifty, kind of speedy. He didn't get to play as much as he would like, probably the same reason because he was behind those two studs. But you transitioned to linebacker, and tell us how your career at LSU went, and then what brought you to the police world.
Well, I was in criminal justice at LSU, and they were switching over at that point to a sociology, which I didn't want to be a sociologist. And they they told me they were saying, hey, if you want to stay in criminal justice, you can go to Southeastern, which that's kind of a problem because I would have had to quit playing ball probably. So I chose to quit playing football and go immediately to work for the sheriff's office. And I went to work a week after I turned 21. I went to work for EBR.
So for those
spent 9 years with them.
Those who don't know EBR, if you listen from another state or another country, EBR is East Baton Rouge Sheriff Department, and we've talked about it in other podcasts. The city police that Bubba and I both retired from is inside of the East Baton Rouge parish. So there's a parish, or y'all call it counties in some areas, and we call it parishes here. And then we work for the city, which was contained within the parish. So you worked there for 9 years. You transitioned to Baton Rouge City Police. When I got to know you mostly, when I became very familiar with you, you were at the range as either a range safety officer or maybe you were the commander. I'm not sure. Kind of give us an idea of where you were at.
Let me start at the beginning and real quickly go through my sheriff's office stuff.
Go ahead.
I worked in narcotics. I worked undercover for about a year, and then I worked as a case agent after that. And I got involved in training. Captain Gene Cobb was the firearms trainer, one of the firearms trainers there that spoke to me about it. And I practiced for a year and went through school, made it through post firearms school. And post was taught by the FBI back then, so it was really hard to get in. I think over 100 people tried out, and there was 6 of us that actually passed. So that gives you the attrition rate. One of many schools that I've been through. While I was with the sheriff's office, they sent me through the state police academy because they knew somebody and they had some openings. So they sent 4 deputies through the state police academy, and we went through that. Came out of that. At some point, the trainers for Baton Rouge Police Department started talking to me and a couple of the others about transferring over to the city. Did that. It was about a 6-month process to get all that done. And I had to do it in secrecy because if the sheriff's office would have caught me doing that, they'd have probably fired me. When I was 29 years old, I was transferred over to the city as a lateral and worked 8 years in uniform. And some of that time I worked with you. And I started training again after a few years, probably about 4 years. I got on SWAT, spent 9 or 10 years on SWAT. I was offered, as all of us were, to go full-time when they were transitioning over to a full-time SWAT team. And I chose, I think I might have been one of the only ones that chose to stay at their job because, all the instructors would have left and gone to SWAT. And so I wanted some sort of continuance in the firearms training program. Yeah. And so I chose to stay. And I was doing part-time SWAT and I was doing training at the range. Ended up going to range master school and took over the range before being transferred several years later to the academy, work as the academy director.
Gotcha. So just for transparency here, people, the post, they require police officers to go and requalify every year. And typically Baton Rouge City Police has 1 day and sometime they'll have a 2-day qualification where you do night fire and some other kind of scenarios that y'all put together. And once again, for transparency, I liked Bubba a lot, but I hated going to the range. Everybody thinks that all cops are gun guys. I hated going to the range every year. We later in our career, we started doing it in our birthday month. And man, I was happy to have a birthday, but sad to have to go to the range. But I will say this, as I got a little older and a little more seasoned, and one reason I didn't want to go is because I like working the streets and I didn't want to be away from work to go shoot. So I'm sure you dealt with that a lot, Bubba. People complaining, and I'm probably complained once or twice about having to do it for multiple days and stuff. So tell us the benefit and the reasoning behind all the scenario-based training and stuff that y'all give us, even those who didn't want to do it.
That's a really good question. About 2013, ballpark, when Chief LaDuff was there, we were looking at transitioning away from, okay, now you've decided to shoot this person. This is where the firearms training comes in. And the use of force was primarily taught at the academy level. And we got into the use of force and the law and the Supreme Court rulings regarding the use of force. And we ended up doing a lot. Now, the decision to be made was, I don't know if you're familiar with the FAT system. We were looking at buying a FAT system, which is like a big projector on the wall that shines scenarios, and the scenarios based upon where the shots are, and it's all done with lasers.
I remember. I don't remember the name of the system, but I remember using that maybe once or twice, but that was it.
Right. Oh, the thing about it, it's a two-dimensional environment. Where it's all happening in one place, not above, below, behind, or beside you. It's happening in front of you. And it's a good foundation. But a guy named Ken Murray had started doing force-on-force training, and we started reading about that. And then about that time, we started looking at low-light training. Some of the agencies in primarily California had been sued successfully for officers that were involved in low-light shootings. And during litigation, the attorneys were challenging the shootings based upon the officers not having gun lights on their weapons and being in a condition that causes, which would be called legal blindness. And that's a situation in which you wouldn't be allowed to legally drive, but you were making these life and death shooting decisions without training in those environments. It was a neglectful thing. And so we went to Streamlight School for a week. We developed a program for low light shooting. As you know, we did that quite often. But then when the force-on-force stuff came along with the simunition, which are glorified paintball guns that look exactly like a real sidearm or rifle, then we could put them in scenarios with role players in diminished light, low light, different levels of light, with strobe lights, with flashlight, ambient light, backlighting. All of these things were being taught. And we were actually, I think, we were pretty ahead of the game on that. We were never successfully sued, to my knowledge, about any low light shooting during that time.
So when just because everybody that listens isn't necessarily gun experts or familiar, when you say low lighting, you mean at dark, where you would? I remember y'all used to get us to pop our flashlight on and shoot. Sometime we had night fire where we had either low or no light, and we'd have to use our night sights. That's what you're referring to?
A combination of everything.
Okay.
The first thing we would touch on was, hey, low light doesn't occur after sunset. Low light can occur at 11 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, depending on where you are. And some of those buildings, as you know, that we trained in at the Old Women's Hospital, when we were using that for training, you could go from bright light to low light, in which your eyes are transitioning, and it takes some time, about 25 minutes to completely transition.
All these scenarios y'all put together that I thought y'all did just to annoy us, actually, and I'm saying that facetiously. I know y'all had a plan, a master plan, but those of us who didn't like to go to the range, we were just okay shooting and going home. But y'all really had a specific plan to make sure that we were trained not only to standard, but really I think that y'all probably trained us above any minimum standards, because even the last few years, and when some of the other people took over the range, we did a lot of shooting from inside vehicles. We did, is it called depth, DEPTH, depth shooting, where you enter, is that what it's called, whenever you kind of catch up with somebody else who's already involved in a firefight?
Yeah, we shout out to Chief LaDuff on that. First of all, we talked considerably before we decided to implement all this stuff. We talked to him. We sat down. I can remember sitting at his conference table talking to him about it. And we said, look, Chief, we think this can save lives. And I believe, there's no way to measure how many lives were saved. We know a few, but there were a lot more that we don't know about, that are raising families and walking around, that probably would have gotten shot or possibly killed if they would not have had that training, because it speeds up your reaction. Because, when you do those force-on-force scenarios, your mind doesn't know the difference between a training scenario and a real life situation. So, it's a double-edged sword. You have to be careful that you don't give them a bad scar from this training where they doubt themselves and hesitate, but you also don't want them to react too quickly. Now, we told Chief LaDuff when we were talking about that, Chief, these people that walk into the district at roll call the next day and say, hey, I was out there working a scene and this person was armed and came out and I told them to drop the weapon, and they didn't drop the weapon. They stepped toward me, and I still didn't shoot. And you've heard these stories, and I've heard them as well. And they end up saying, there was something about this person that I didn't shoot him. And it's an intangible that's really really hard for officers to describe as, you know, they don't want to be called a coward or anything. They don't want to be thought of as less than being a alpha, you know. But we continually heard that throughout our career. And then we told Chief LaDuff, when we start doing this type of training, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And they're going to react as they have during training 1,000 times. And you're going to have these people shoot people. And our shootings are going to go up. But they're going to be good shootings. And they're going to be these people that hesitated before that aren't going to hesitate after this. And we talked a lot about that.
Well, look, let's clarify, because non-police personnel, when we talk about good shootings, we mean that they follow the letter of the law and they're justified. Good shooting doesn't mean that, you know, that we were happy to shoot somebody, because cops aren't happy to shoot people. So, you know, kind of clarify that just a little bit for us.
Well, it's really a good shooting to me is one that can pass the legal litmus test. And at the end of the day, the officer is considered justified, and the department is free of any litigation or certainly any damages. Legal under the law is not morally and ethically, in some cases, easy to live with. And we're starting to see the aftermath of that as well. You have officers who were involved in situations like that they're having a hard time, I guess, like the military or whatever.
Right, just post-traumatic stress type situations. So
right.
let's transition to this component of the qualification. There's always going to be failures, and I was really okay. I never didn't pass in all my 32 years of police. The highest score I made was a 118, but you see it all the time, and you tell us, is it the same people? The 96 is the minimum. If they don't shoot a 96 or better out of 120, then what was BRPD's stance on that until people got, as we say, in their feelings? Tell us, you know, what the outcome was if you failed.
Well, what we did several years ago, when I say several, it's probably just prior to 2015, we implemented a remedial program for shooters. And sure, 96 was the cutoff for being qualified under the state. And if you shot a 96 or above, you were allowed to go to work for another year without having to requalify. But the Baton Rouge City Police and the Sheriff's Office, they looked at that, and we went to, I think, 106. And if you shot below a 106, you were in remedial for 1 year, which meant you were required to come and practice that was monitored. And you could come unlimited, but you had to come at least once a month and practice monitored.
Okay, well, let's go right before that remedial training took place. Tell us about the people that failed before, because I think it's important to know that police officers, you tow guns for a living. You have to be proficient with your weapon. If you're not capable, then you not only a distraction to other officers, but you could also be the reason why people don't make it out of a shoot, don't shoot situation. So your lack of proficiency could cause me to die, right? So what did y'all do before the remedial stuff? And then I know they made y'all change because, like I said, people got, but, you know, kind of tell us what happened to the people who didn't qualify, what y'all did to them. They had to go home and all that stuff. I mean, you don't have to get real in depth about it, but just let them know.
I'll give you a real life scenario. A person would come out and they were having a bad day and they were sick and they would shoot. Normally it wasn't their shooting that made them not qualify. It was a problem with either their reloading, they had a jam. It was some mechanical thing and not the sights and trigger problem. Now, occasionally it was a sights and trigger problem, but the majority of them just had a bad day. And they would come out and they would shoot below 96, and they would go through that day's training to get that knowledge. And then at the end of the day, they would leave their unit at the range. They would leave their gun at the range, and they would be required to come back the next morning in their own car and qualify again. And if they qualified, they went back to work. If they failed, they were given a week. And they would practice for a week with no car, no gun, couldn't work. They would work the desk or whatever administrative duties that the captains would have them do. And they would try again in a week. And if they didn't qualify after a week, they would go another week through the same process and try again a week later. And I think we only had, the whole time I was there, and I was on and off there since 2003, from 2003 to about 2018. And I think we only had one or two that actually went the full extent to the second week. But, around 2014, departments started being sued for negligent retention. And that's one of those Google words you're going to have to look up. Look up negligent retention referring to police departments. And you'll find that here's the dilemma. You have that person that comes out on day one and they fail. Let's say they shot a 90. And they come back the next day and they shot 89. They did worse. So that you have two failures. They come back a week later and they shoot a 93. They come back a week later and they qualify. Well, now you've got 3 failures and 1 qualification. So what that did over time, attorneys were looking at those numbers and saying, hey, this person's failing more than they actually pass. And you're not remediating that person and certainly not documenting the remediation. And you are setting yourself up for a lawsuit, basically. And we were told that the majority of those lawsuits started about $900,000 and go up. And I think what they told us was they win over 70% of those lawsuits against departments. So we're in the job of protecting the city and the department from litigation. So we wanted to get ahead of that. So we invented the remedial program to document the remediation in case we were ever challenged. And it got pretty extensive. And, when you give them a standard, they tend to meet the standard. So the people that had a bad day would come back the next day, knew I'm in this process, I'm in this system for a year, and they would shoot considerably better. The overwhelming majority of them they wanted to get off, and they got off relatively quickly.
Yeah, well, and the one thing that I remember is I used to hang the keys up, man, and that was people today, they don't understand that successes sometimes are based off of failures, right? And people get mad, like, why are you making me look bad? You hang my keys up. If I can't qualify and you hang my keys up and everybody knows I didn't qualify, because, it's common knowledge. If you're there with 20 people and one don't qualify, the word's going to get out that you didn't qualify. And I believe peer pressure in our profession is actually needed. We're going to hound them and harass them a little bit just in good joke and fun. But if we're on a house and we got somebody who was in remedial and we all have to get involved in the shooting, we need them to be up to par with everybody else. So police don't like when other police officers fail these minimum standards, like in shooting and stuff. But, we police, man, and we harass each other a little bit in good nature. So let's transition to a topic that you and I have talked about in the past. And we had an officer, Rich McCloskey, who was shot at, and maybe you remember, was it like 4 or 5 times?
Rich was in several shootings. I think he was shot twice.
Well, let's talk about the specific one where he was shot and he had a mic that basically absorbed the bullet, if for lack of a better term.
Right. Well, the firearms instruction and the firearms unit would go out on all officer-involved shootings. And if it was a fatality regarding a suspect, we would actually go to the autopsy. And the reason we would do that, we wanted to see how our ammunition was performing in an actual body. Went to a bunch of autopsies and saw a bunch of stuff. But we also learned that some of the bullets we were initially shooting were having a problem. And I don't want to get too involved, but we have a core jacket separation where the copper jacket was peeling away really quickly once it hit the body. It would go in about an inch, maybe 2 inches, and then it would actually pull off of the lead core. And the lead core was tumbling like a musket ball, and it wasn't doing what we wanted it to do. And as a result of going to those autopsies, we went to a Spear Gold Dot ammunition, which is a bonded round where the jacket wouldn't pull off. And there's pros and cons with both types of ammunition, but we have for a long time shot the bonded ammunition, and Ricky Arnett was really instrumental in that transition. But Yeah, we would go out and on that particular one, I can remember it like it was yesterday. Rich said he had gotten shot in his mic, and the mic had stopped the round. And
so he was, if I remember the story, he was on a traffic stop. A guy turns to run, but he turns and shoots back at Rich, right?
Right. And Rich was wearing his mic like right under his throat, so it was hanging initially over his heart, I guess. And sure, the microphone was broken. We really couldn't tell it had been shot. We thought we didn't know what happened. So we went and got some old mics from Rob Fairley, who was over the radio division, one of his many duties. And we brought him out there, and with the 38 caliber, which the suspect was shooting, we shot it. We shot those mics, and the magnet in the mic and the speaker of the mic stopped that 38 round. So we actually proved that to be true.
So the bad guy turns. He's on a traffic stop. The bad guy turns to run. The bad guy runs. He turns. He shoots. I might be wrong, so y'all don't quote me on this, but I think he shot like 4 or 5 times.
I don't remember.
One of the
I don't
bullets.
remember how many times.
One of the bullets specifically hit the mic. So officers sometimes they wear the mics on their shoulder. Sometimes they wear it like you said, under your throat, at the top of your vest or at your uniform, so you can just reach in front of you without having to, make a big effort to call on the radio. So when the bullet is fired at him, if this mic doesn't intercept and deflect the whatever you want to call it, the power or the energy, then it probably would have went through his upper chest, lower throat area, and possibly definitely wounded him, but possibly killing him. So there was a bunch of us who had new mics, and then there were the old mics. So y'all, if I remember correctly, y'all did the scenario with the old mics and the new mics, and only the old mics stopped the bullet. Is that correct?
I don't remember. I think both of them stopped the bullet.
Oh, they did? Okay.
It had nothing to do with the mic. It had to do with the magnet in the speaker.
Okay, so it was a magnet.
They had a big disc-shaped magnet that sat behind, and it was strong enough to stop that round, that 38 round. Yeah,
that's pretty profound, man. I bet you. I never talked to Rich about it, but I bet you that was an eye-opening experience. I've been shot at multiple times. One specifically, they shot at us, and Chris McClure, if you remember Chris got shot. He got hit in the arm, and it shattered many of his bones. And I remember vividly, driving that night, hearing around, and I jokingly in my mind said, shots fired in the area, because we're always exposed to random shots. But I was driving a truck. I had 2 passengers, and I had 2 other officers in the back of the truck, in the truck bed, and McClure was in the back. He was hit, but they hit the truck 4 out of 5 times, I believe. Do you remember that incident at all?
Okay, I remember he was riding back to the truck, and he was hit. And I think we never really found out if he was actually shot at or if that was just a random round that hit him. We really don't know.
Oh, no. But I tell you, I don't know. I was in the truck driving, so 4 rounds hit the truck, maybe 3 for sure, but they definitely were shooting at us. Now, here's the thing about this guy. We never could pin it on him. We had people that told us who it was, and we had the whole scenario, but we wasn't able to pin it on him. We knew who it was, and 20-something years later, I happened to be in court. And we all know this guy's name. I'm not going to mention it on the podcast, but he actually got in trouble and convicted of shooting at another officer many years later and was arrested for that. And on the particular day I happened to be in court, just randomly, I see the guy in court. So I listened to his court case, and they gave him 25 years. So I texted everybody who was involved in the incident. It was 5 of us total who was involved in the incident, that we couldn't pin it on him. I didn't handle the case. Other people did, but we knew who it was. So I said, hey, man, justice was served. This guy just got 25 years. So none of us will ever be dealing with him again. And like I said, I'm not going to mention his name, but he's in the penitentiary right now based on another officer involved shooting. So let's transition now away from the police training and tactics, and let's talk about concealed carry and what your opinion is and what the objectives are for citizens that want to do concealed carry and stuff. So give us some insight on that.
Well, that's probably the most common question I'm asked is about concealed carry and open carry. Two different things. Initially, before we got in the business of teaching civilians how to shoot and when to shoot, we looked at these auditors, and that's what they call these people that go around to different police agencies and government buildings and open carry to try to get departments to do something illegal that would become a civil rights violation, and they could sue and settle for money against that government entity. And we, if you remember, we had an extensive class on how to handle people open carrying and concealed carrying, and the rules are not the same for each of those groups. An open carrier actually has a whole lot more leeway as to where they can carry, and concealed carry permit people actually prohibited from certain. I'll use parade as an example, because of the way the concealed carry law is written. A person cannot carry a concealed weapon with a permit at a parade, and an open carrier can be at a parade lawfully because it's covered under federal law and not state law.
So when you say open carry, for those who are not familiar with these terms, open carry is whenever you have a sidearm that is in a holster and is displayed openly for anybody to see.
Right. And when Richard Ayoub was the Attorney General, he defined what open carry is, and we used that definition. It hadn't been changed to my knowledge, but if you could tell that it was a firearm, and we can get into the, is it 35% exposed, or does it have to be 60% exposed, or whatever? If a reasonable person can look at that and tell that it is a firearm, it is considered open carry.
Okay, good deal. And then concealed carry, obviously you have to go to a class, be trained, and have a permit, right?
It's a 9-hour class, and they have to shoot at the end of that class. But there's use of force, a whole long day. And they're all very similar to one another. Actually, we had the federal judge, one of the federal judges, and I won't mention his name, but him and his wife went through our class, our concealed carry class with the Baton Rouge Police Department. And he actually wrote a nice letter afterwards saying that it was a very thorough and lawful class, and he approved wholeheartedly. But we taught over the course of my little tenure there probably over 1,000 people to get their permits. My family included went through.
Yeah, good deal, man. Before we end the podcast, there's two things I want to touch on. First, I want to commend you and all the other range personnel at Baton Rouge City Police. There's quite a few people, so I don't want to leave any out. I know you mentioned Ricky Arnett earlier. There's been people that came and went. There's people there now. Josh Ellis. Who's in charge of the range now? Do you know?
No, I've been away for a couple of years, so it's Stuart Tate is who is over the range right now, and Stuart was a sergeant at the academy when I was there. Very knowledgeable guy, and he's currently over. And Josh is there, and Jared Johnson is there, and all great guys. Josh was a Ranger in the military, one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever encountered. Now, I did encounter some people in SWAT that were. We had a training officer that was a retired Delta Force officer that was very knowledgeable. But we had some tremendous instructors when I was young.
Ricky and I talked about him in a SWAT podcast, Kit Cessna.
Right.
I remember Kevin Newman was at the range for quite some time, and he was actually a pretty good instructor also. And Jared Johnson, like you said, Josh Ellis. I told Josh maybe 2-3 years ago. More than that, because I've been retired almost 3 years. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I went to him and I said, "Look, man, I'm the guy who don't like coming to the range." I said, "But the last several years, I really thought that the training was not only precise, it was intentional to expose us to elements of what's currently going on in society, and that's having to shoot from, like I said, inside vehicles, outside vehicles, shoot from depth whenever you're approaching, how to maneuver with other officers." I really think that later in my career, I started appreciating the range a little bit more. You as a firearms expert, what I want to know from you is this. You see a lot of stuff going on in society, and there's mass shootings everywhere. There's people getting out of their vehicles, engaging other people for little or no reason. They're shooting at churches, nightclubs, at the chicken place, at the burger place. What is your professional opinion as far as open carry, concealed carry, or how you can protect yourself?
First off, the question has to be answered individually by the person who is thinking about concealed carrying or open carrying. And the question right off the bat, it could be a disqualifier. Am I willing to shoot someone? If the situation occurs and I am in danger of losing my life, someone else is in danger of losing their life, and a reasonable person would look at that incident and say, that person was in desperate need of using deadly force, would they do it? And you'd be surprised at how many people will do anything but that. People who have tried to be policemen or been in the academy have been disqualified because after talking to them, they couldn't pull the trigger. Either, for whatever reason. A lot of it was religious reasons. And over time, and I never foresaw that I would get in the business of this, but we had to look at all the things involved, not just pulling the trigger and lining the sights and breath control and all that. The decision made beforehand and then living with that decision afterwards. Post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think, and I believe, and this is my opinion, I believe if you answer those questions for yourself ahead of time and you are ethical and moral person in the right way, that you aren't going to get post-traumatic stress disorder. You're probably going to give it to somebody else. You're probably a carrier, as Dave Grossman said. I think a lot of work is left to be done on the psychological aspects. And in my humble opinion, I think every large department should have an on-staff psychologist that you should have to talk to once or twice a year, just to work it out. Because if you're your own analyst as to whether you're having problems and you're reasonable, then you're the worst person probably to do that. You probably have to have somebody with fresh eyes to look at you and how you're acting and what the stresses are that you're under to determine, hey, maybe let's move this person into another job for a while and give them a break.
Right.
And I think these psychological casualties, and we have a bunch of them. These psychological casualties that everybody's having can be not eliminated, but reduced. Right. And that might be the best we can do. But we owe it to those people to at least try to do that.
And I tell people,
there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to be done with that.
Right. And I agree. And we've talked about that on some of my previous podcasts. And I tell people, deal with it now so you don't have to deal with it in 20 years. So you're basically saying, from a civilian standpoint, you have to make sure, because everybody says, oh, yeah, I'll shoot the blankety blank, but not everybody can. You have to make sure internally that you understand that you actually have to pull this trigger, because lack of pulling the trigger may mean that they may get the gun and turn it on you. So it's an individual decision. And in today's climate, do you think that people that are of the mindset to carry would be better in open carry or would be better in concealed carry? Because I'm pretty sure that they just changed the law in Louisiana to where you can conceal without training. Is that true?
I don't believe that law has been changed. I think they tried to change it, but I don't believe it passed.
Okay.
And I've just been watching. I get my information like everybody else now, but it's a rabbit hole that if all a person has had is based upon a movie or television or talking to their friend who knows less than they do, then they might have a training scar that they haven't even trained and might have a training scar. And you have the person, and we would talk to these people in our classes. And where do you keep your gun? Well, I keep it in a gun safe. Oh, it's a good place for it. Do you keep it loaded? Oh, no, I don't keep it loaded. So if something were to happen, you would have to go unlock the safe, get the gun, load the magazine or load the cylinder, and then, get ready. By that time, as you know, most of those situations are over with. If it's a home invasion, couches don't stop rounds like on TV. You have to know what will stop around. You have to get behind those things. You have to have the weapon accessible. I really like these biometric safes. If you're a safe person, the biometric safes have made improvements by leaps and bounds if they're in reasonable proximity. But, let's use a scenario that you're sitting on your couch and somebody kicks in your door and you've been watching TV for several hours, and now they're coming in at full speed with a plan, armed, and you are transitioning from that Netflix movie to a deadly force encounter. Chances are they've got you, even if you're sitting on unless the gun is sitting loaded on the counter next to you, which it probably the best you could hope for is a draw in that situation, which would mean you both shoot each other and probably both get hit. But it's certainly not the war that you would want to fight.
Right.
So if your intention is to thwart a home invasion, you have to come up with a better plan than have the gun and a lock safe unloaded.
So everybody needs to come up with an individual plan, an individual mindset. And look, I tell people this all the time. My wife used to crack up when I'd get out of my police car, but I practice drawing all the time. And I practice drawing from sitting down in my unit. When I got home, I practice drawing all the time. And I pulled my gun hundreds and maybe thousands of times in the line of duty, not necessarily to engage somebody to shoot, but maybe to stop them from doing whatever they're doing, in a deadly force encounter. But I never, ever, not even once, had a misdraw. I did at the range on occasion. You'd miss it. And, when y'all had the 3-point holster, you had to do 3 things to get the weapon out. Those were a little bit more intense to learn. But once you learned them, it was secondary nature.
To go back to what you said in the beginning of, having anxiety before you went to the range. Let me put that in context. We wanted them to have a certain level of anxiety. We wanted the training to be hard. We wanted it to be difficult. If you remember, when you first started your training in the academy, the first thing you did was you learned to draw the weapon, right? You learned to do it with your strong hand, with your offhand, and we put you in contorted positions to simulate you being wounded and having to do that, having to fight with your left hand if you're right-handed, having to reload with your left hand. Then if you remember, we put oil on your gun and we had you do these things with a slippery gun. And that was done to simulate you bleeding on your weapon, because a lot of people don't know that blood has viscosity of about oil. Those things hopefully save someone's life down the road. And I believe they have.
Yeah,
there are instances where they have.
I think, honestly, man, looking back over my entire career, I think that y'all exposed us to just about every scenario that, we could be exposed to. We even had the shoot house. A lot of people don't remember that, but we had the shoot house. But y'all gave us scenarios that were based on realistic things that was occurring in the police department and nationally and locally. And, we did so many different styles of shooting. And when I say styles, I mean, like I said earlier, from in car, from out of a car, from, no barricade to trying to find a barricade. We had simulation fights where we stepped out of our car and we were engaged automatically from a distance from somebody that we didn't know where he was at. And we had to, bring the fight to them. As we end the podcast, I'll say this, Bubba. It was a joy talking to you. But all those who were involved in my career at Baton Rouge City Police at the pistol range, and even before when I worked at LSU and the Sheriff Department, y'all put us in the best possible mindset to be successful. And many lives, and like I said, you can't quantify it, but many lives were saved, not only police lives, but maybe civilian lives whenever, that we reacted a certain way. Maybe, through training, we realized that it wasn't a scenario where we needed to pull the trigger or whatever the case may be. I think y'all gave us the best chance to be successful through y'all's hard work, dedication, and training. And the training was intense at times. And like I said, some people like guns. I don't like guns that much. So the training was always annoying to me till my latter years. But y'all did a good job to keep people motivated. And we all understood, why we were there and what y'all's intentions were. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for being on my podcast. And you got to close in our statements.
Well, but I want to give a shout out to someone that you brought up a really good point about civilian lives being saved. Charlie Robinson, fantastic firearms instructor, a good friend of mine. Him and Josh Ellis decided, and those guys are on the cutting edge of everything, decided several years ago, they were going to become EMTs, and they went through the EMT program with the fire department and they rode on ambulances and treated people. And both of those guys were on SWAT at the time, and they also worked at the range. They decided they wanted to do some battlefield medicine, and they were very important as to starting the tourniquet program and the first aid program. Initially, they had, and if you remember several years ago, the guy on the railroad tracks that had gotten run over by the train that lost, I believe, both his legs and one of his arms.
I do remember that.
And those people would have bled to death had we not had tourniquets to put on. And that person, their life was saved. And since then, God, countless people have been saved with that training. Josh Ellis, I know, had a gunshot victim over on Howland Road around LSU that he saved a guy at a convenience store with a potato chip bag that had a sucking chest wound. Just unbelievable stories of people who are walking around today that would have been dead, 10, 12 years ago, certainly would have been dead. And it has brought the murder numbers down. The homicide numbers have dropped. A lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice done to do that. But certainly that first aid, battlefield medicine, tourniquet has saved a tremendous, and I honestly believe the murder rate would be double had we not implemented that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Charlie did. Charlie did a bunch of stuff as far as his inventory and weapons and stuff like that. That was just like, where did he get this from? He just, pulled it out of thin air. But fantastic job. And he's no longer a police officer. He's moved on. But the private sector pays him a whole lot more than the government could pay him.
That's right.
For his work.
And Charlie was a good cop. He was a good young cop. When I made sergeant, I told Charlie, this has nothing to do with the shooting aspect of it, but I told Charlie, I said, when I become sergeant, I'm going to call you. And if you're in a position where you want to move, I want you to come to my squad, because he was a really good proactive cop and knew his job well and it transitioned well to the range. And the Charlie
could have done anything. I always felt guilty having Charlie, because I had this guilt that I was holding his career back.
Well, kudos to all the range cadre from the past and all those who are still continuing to do the job. Ex or retired lieutenant, correct?
I retired as lieutenant. I spent my last 2 years on workman's comp. I got in a car wreck and fractured my neck, amongst other things. I ended up having about 7 surgeries, but I'm all right now, finally.
Okay, well, you enjoy your retirement, and we appreciate you being on Big Head on the Block.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Big Head on the Block. I'm Tim Henderson, the host. I look forward to dropping another podcast soon. Please give us any comments, likes, dislikes, or any topics y'all would like to discuss. Thank you.